It's time for The World This Week, 7 days for Paris-based correspondents, 1 hour. The World This Week with Time Magazine's Vivian Walt. How are you, Vivian?
Very good.
Also with us, Judah Grunstein of World Politics Review, which you can find at worldpoliticsreview.com.
Exactly.
Olivier Guez of the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, whose new book is called
American Spleen.
American Spleen. And what's it about?
It's about American melancholy these days.
The feeling they're no longer number one.
Exactly. Yeah, not only, but part of it, of course. Yeah.
All right. We'll pick up more on that in the second part of our discussion. Also with us, reporter Celestine Bowen. How are you?
Very well, thanks.
The World This Week, which you can follow on Facebook and even weigh in on the conversation. Same for Twitter, where you can find us at François F24. The shelling of Homs may have forced out the Syrian Free Army and Western journalists, and even though the UN says part of the city has been destroyed, demonstrators reportedly back on the streets after prayers this Friday. In Time Magazine's cover story, Vivian Walt, you penned the tale of photographer William Daniels, who after his escape with Figaro reporter Edith Bouvier had a badly broken leg. She had a badly broken leg. He said, quote, "Even the names of the activists who died in the rescue must remain secret."
Absolutely. In fact, there were many details that William was terrified to talk about, and which certainly I couldn't put in this piece. There were a lot that, a lot of details that simply unpublishable. They are too risky for those that have been left behind. And I think what's so strange about the story is that you have 6 Western journalists who snuck into Homs. 2 of them were killed. 4 of them made it out. 2 badly injured. And it really, in a sense, gripped the world's attention to what had been going on for weeks, which was the absolute pummeling of the city. And the tales of bravery in the face of this, of just regular civilians, I think is really kind of quite remarkable. And including the bravery of the small group of journalists as well.
The United Nations now putting the toll at above 7,500 killed in the past year. We can look at some of those pictures that Daniels brought back, including one where, if you look at it, behind the building you'll see on the right, in the foreground of the picture there, 4 foreign reporters found themselves trapped. So it's in each of those streets it's behind that street that they found themselves in.
Absolutely. They were totally trapped for 5 days. When they finally got out, it was an absolute last resort attempt to get out. They had to carry Edith Bouvier on a stretcher through a 2.5-mile tunnel, crouching in this tunnel. And the tunnel was then attacked, and William Daniels was left alone with Edith Bouvier in this tunnel, basically facing death, to such a point that one of the fighters left their Kalashnikov rifle with them just to try to defend themselves to the last bullet. And it was really only by happenstance that they happened to get out of there. But the story is horrific.
All right, the story's horrific, and it's true that when I read it, I thought, are we focusing again too much on Western reporters? But actually, it is a concise tale, and you get an accurate picture of what's going on.
Well, it's certainly William, who I spent many, many hours with this week, would say the same thing. He was very upset by the overwhelming coverage of their story and felt that the whole story of the Syrians was getting lost. It is obviously our prism into this very far-off place, but certainly his witness and the witness of journalists there has just been crucial, I think.
What's amazing is that despite the visit of the UN's humanitarian chief to Homs this week, the images from Homs are once again very sparse. It's back to relying on amateur footage uploaded to the internet. Syria initially refusing to grant Valerie Amos access to the country, but relenting after Assad backers Russia and China joined the rest of the Security Council in pressuring his regime. When the week began, Judah Grunstein, you had the feeling that it was game over for the opposition, the Syrian Free Army moving back, the crackdown moving to places like Idlib near the border with Turkey, And again, despite the fact that we're back to amateur video footage, we know that there's still protests going on.
Well, yeah, I think that this that Homs will be a turning point, really one way or the other, in the sense that it's true that the story was sort of horrific for weeks, and it was the journalists that brought attention to it, but also for the fact that they were able to report what was going on, which there was really very little coming out besides the amateur video. What seems to be happening is that at the very beginning of the Syrian crisis, and even for the past year, or for the first year, there was almost a consensus that as bad as Assad was, as bad as he is, he's sort of the devil we know. All the major players in the region, Turkey has invested quite a bit in the relationship. Israel is somewhat comfortable with him in the sense that they know that they have a sort of stable enmity and a hot peace. The Saudis were sort of preoccupied in their neck of the woods. What seems to have really happened and coalesced in the last couple of weeks, with the exception of Russia and China, is that there's a consensus that Assad has to go, and that for a lot of strategic reasons, it's actually very advantageous with regards to containing Iran that he does go. And so there seems to be less fear of the unknown and less fear of the destabilizing aspects of him going. And I think that really does have to do with the events of the last 2-3 weeks and the kind of reporting that's been able to come out of Homs, because the Western journalists were trapped there.
You won't be able to put that back in a box. There was a further chink in the armor this week with several defections from the top brass of the army, and the highest-ranking defection so far from inside the government, the number 2 at the oil ministry, who'd been in government for more than 3 decades, crossing the border into Lebanon. Abdo Hussemeddin, a 58-year-old father of 4, says he's now worried of reprisals against his family. When you think back to this, Olivier Guez, with Libya, this was sort of the beginning of the end, when we saw, for instance, the ambassador to the UN who defected, that those defections were the beginning. It's taken a year, though, in the case of Syria. It's taken much, much longer.
Yeah, and it's going to take more time, I think, because, I mean, Assad regime is still pretty powerful, and he can play all kind of options within the Syrian population. He knows that some minorities, like the Christians or the Kurds, are pretty afraid of what can happen when he leaves the power. So even if the Christians or the Kurds don't approve what he's doing right now, he knows that they're so afraid of what can happen after he leaves that these people won't move too much, in fact. And also the opposition is very divided, sorry for this, divided. And for instance, Qatar, Saudi Arabia wanted to help, and was still kind of helping them. They don't know exactly to whom to deliver weapons, and also there are lots of fights with the National Council outside of Syria. So you still have some cards, in fact, inside of Syria, still have some margins, in fact, to play one faction against the other.
Still a bit of margin.
Might take lots of time.
Just to jump on that, because I think it's very important. People get very excited every time there's a defection or every time there's a protest. Or the fact is that from the very beginning, the people who know Syria the best have said that this is going to be a long, drawn-out, and very bloody conflict, and
it's going to be very bloody.
And that's tragic, but the fact is that it's not going to be one defection. There might be a critical mass that's reached, but there's no guarantee at this point that it ends well.
I feel as though you read from time to time, and Vivian, you would know better, that it's already happening. I mean, that the Alawites are already feeling the heat, that there are stories of atrocities on the other side. So that, I mean, to some extent, that civil war that everybody's been warning about is, creeping into reality, basically. And I think this international dilemma about, what to do is really, very, it's very palpable, really.
But at the same time, Celestine, this week, twice the Chinese have called to task the regime. Mm-hmm. And now that the election is over in Russia, are we going to see a new tone out of Moscow?
I mean, I think, Putin has already, in his own strange way, signaled something by saying, kind of mysteriously, well, he's not around forever, which was, if you sort of parse it.
Cryptic.
Then, but something of a sign that they, too, must, and as they surely must, look to a sort of a next stage in Syria. And they do have interests. They have their naval base. They have, they have a relationship that goes way back, and they don't want to be, left in the cold and so on. Those are the considerations that I'm sure they have. But, I think the post-Assad era is already on their mind.
But on the other end, I would add that even, especially if Russia kind of takes its distance to Assad, that might mean that it's going to be even more bloody than it has been, because basically Assad doesn't have any cards anymore, and he has gone so far, and so it's been so wide. I mean, the last weeks. So basically, he's going to fight and fight and fight to keep his power, because he doesn't have any.
The questions that still remain are who, how, and why. Who, how, and where. But I think that the consensus really has become something has to be done. That it's too bloody. It's too destabilizing the way it is, and so that the unknown is now less frightening to everyone else waiting to intervene.
All right, the last word from Vivian on this.
It just seems like there are far bigger obstacles in this. The one is being, as Olivia said, this extremely divided opposition. We don't really know who they are, what they are, and
What they want.
And what they want, yeah. And on top of that, it's not Libya, because we don't have NATO. And Libya might have been just as drawn out and bloody, ultimately, if there had not been a NATO intervention.
And Syria has a much better armed forces than Libya
All right,
did.
we mentioned Russia. We can talk about Russia now. Russia, where now that presidential elections are over, it's back to work for the country's president. This week, inspecting preparations for the 2014 Sochi Olympics. There you see Vladimir Putin getting in a bit of target practice there. And yes, the president back at the job. Celestine Boland, 63%. Was this what you expected, roughly?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the sort of dilemma of Russia, is that 63, 57. I mean, I'm sure there was a bit of, cheating here and there. Obviously tried to not have that happen, because they didn't need to have it happen. The issue is that, there's still a majority of people who support him. And so as the opposition goes to its next step, they are officially having to take that into account.
And were you surprised by the seemingly high turnout that we saw Monday evening in Pushkin Square in Moscow?
Yeah, no, because I mean, I think an energy has been released, and it has, it's looking for places to go. It's not going to go back into the bottle either, like we were saying. And I think, interestingly, there's reports of something that would be really encouraging if people go into local elections. There are going to be other local elections coming up. I mean, I think, take that energy, take the wit and the cleverness that we were seeing all these months, which I think is a sign that this middle class is really sort of alive and awake and ready to move on to the next stage. That is the next sort of obvious stage, real political representation with, working on real issues, proving to people that they're not just out there marching. And I think, if they're ready to do that, if they would get organized to do that, I think that would be an amazing result.
And even though there were protests and allegations of fraud that Celestine was mentioning, that's all sour grapes, says the winner.
Obviously, those who lost don't like to be defeated. There's nothing unusual about that. It has to be recognized. But one thing, when people say the authorities should listen to this, the authorities should listen to that, well, our opponents also should listen to the voice of the people who have had their say.
Everyone is arguing about what Putin will be like during this term. Will he tighten the screws?
Definitely, of course. Don't ease up.
All right, a bit of Kremlin humor there from Vladimir Putin. But that is the question, reform or repress?
Yeah, reform or repress. I think that it probably has to be a little bit of repress first and then hopefully some reform later. That was the big question with the whole tandem. Was Medvedev was obviously more closely associated with reform. Certainly Russia needs it in every sense, politically, economically, demographically. So yeah, it's necessary. The question is whether the political infrastructure can actually survive the kind of reform that's necessary. In a lot of these situations, the kinds of demands that outside observers are putting on the regime are somewhat suicidal for the regime itself. So the question is, how effectively the Russian political infrastructure can actually move towards reform while surviving.
Olivier Guez, your prediction on this?
Concerning Russia, maybe I would mention 2 points. That there is clearly kind of a tale of two Russias. You have the Russia of the West. I mean, the big cities like St. Petersburg or Moscow, which are very close. I mean, the population is pretty close to the European ones, and you have these middle classes. And I think that Putin got less than 50% in Moscow on Sunday, so which is a big sign, and Prokhorov got more than 20%. So, but the rest of the country is still pro-Putin. I mean, there is a huge gap between the two.
Well,
I mean, not all of course.
I mean,
of course.
A lot of big cities,
Yeah,
and there are a lot of big cities in Russia with.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, a big
so
divide.
all the way to Vladivostok to the
between big cities and countrysides. Now, what's going to be interesting is how the opposition is going to be able to mobilize people for local elections. I think that's going to be the main fights for the next months, the next years, because I think Putin has agreed in December that the governors are going to be elected again. That was something that he gave to the opposition after the protests in December. So it will be interesting to see if the opposition is going to be able to mobilize its forces for these elections, and also for like the mayor in Moscow, Prokhorov, maybe has some chances. So I think that's going to be the new battleground for the opposition, local and municipal elections.
All right, think local when it comes to Russia. Stay with us. The World This Week continues. When we come back, we're going to look at campaigns taking place in this country and in the United States. This is The World This Week.